Welcome, everyone. Thank you. I'm excited to be on this panel. Today, we have three esteemed panelists with us who have demonstrated their leadership, not only during times of relative normalcy, but more importantly, how do you lead during the current times? You heard MR and Raj and others talk about, the environment we are in right now. And Ravi, Niraj, and Bob will share their thoughts on how they are adapting and leading through the current pandemic and championing diversity and social justice. Thank you. Welcome. So we're halfway through 2020 and it feels like an eternity, particularly I think in the US. And what a year it has been. COVID-19, we're in the second wave and nobody knows what is yet to come. Surging unemployment. We have the Black Lives Matter movement, an anti-immigration stand, an increasingly polarized country, and an election year to boot. So with everything going on, I would love thoughts from our panelists on how do you adapt? How do you ensure that we do see change, and how do businesses transcend during these uncertain times? So I'd like to start with Ravi. You wrote a heartfelt letter in support of the protests against racial injustice, diversity, and wherein you mentioned the importance of celebrating diversity. And I love that you launched an initiative called Black Lives Thrive. Fantastic wording, BLT, I love it. Can you tell us a bit more about some steps that Newell has taken or will take in the quest for radical racial justice? And more importantly, I think, how do we ensure that we continue to keep up this momentum post-COVID and post-2020?
Great. Good morning, Nandini, and thank you for that. Look, I think for me, I've historically focused on gender diversity. That's been one of the things I've been a great champion of. And when I joined Newell, I found that 48% of our population were women. We have 30,000 employees. We're about a $10 billion company. And about 30% of them were in director and VP levels and above. So it was not bad. The top, though, was not as well formed. We had one female CEO out of 8 businesses. And so in the 9 months, we've changed that. And I've recruited in 2 new women to come in and run our businesses, promoted one from within. So we've now 50-50. 4 out of 5 businesses are run by women, which is terrific. 3 of our board members are women. But when the George Floyd incident occurred, and it was just on the heels of Ahmaud Arbery and living in Atlanta, and then I'd read about Breonna Taylor, and in the back of my mind, this was always an issue. And this just sort of touched me viscerally. And so just a few days after this, one night, I sat down, it just came to me, and I wrote that note that you referred. And then I convened our employee resource group called Beacon of Black employees and sort of read it out to them and said, hey, I want to send this to the organization. What do you think? And they were very touched. In fact, they said, record it and do it as an audio, which I did. But to me, that really created a new purpose for me at Newell. That I felt we were getting the gender thing well on its way, but that we had to do something about more than Black Lives Matter, that Black lives actually thrive, and it's focusing on what we can control. I can only control what happens in my company. I can't, but if at least we are touching the 30,000 lives and making a difference, they will touch more lives, and hopefully it'll be a movement. And so the first phase of this is really discovery and awareness. Being an immigrant, sometimes you think you're brown and you understand Black people. Well, you really don't. Their lives are quite different. And I've spent a lot of time talking one-on-one to our Black employees. 2 things they said to me really bothered me and moved me. One was, they said, we try so hard to assimilate. I said, what do you mean assimilate? I'm an immigrant. I'm always trying to assimilate. I've lived in 6 countries. You were born here. Why do you need to assimilate? And that really showed me the issue and what a big problem it was. Another thing they said was, we cannot bring our whole selves to work, and that they can't be authentic. And I said, I'm very committed to make Newell a place where employees can bring their whole selves to work, and be authentic and be themselves so that they can perform at their best. So I've created a advisory board of Black employees, and I'm calling it Black Lives Thrive at Newell because I want it to be uplifting. I want Newell to become a model company for racial harmony, but also where it actually becomes a competitive advantage and people just feel great and drive it innovation. We're working on, we have a Hispanic director. Obviously, I'm a director of Indian origin, and we had a Black director who just retired. So we're replacing him with a Black director. So these are the steps we're taking. I want to increase 12% of our population is Black employees, but we only have 3% for VPs. So we need to do a lot more in the VP level. So I've told each of our business units that, but they've always got to get the best athletes. So this is not tokenism. And then the final thing is really working on unconscious bias and conditioning. And because that is one of the biggest evils in any place is you react to stereotypes. So we're working with the NAACP and supporting Teaching for Change, which is a nonprofit for social justice in the classroom. And the final thing I'd say is really working on two things. There are two words that I constantly use in the company during COVID times: compassion and tolerance. The other one now I'm using more recently is call on your conscience. So whenever you want to say something hurtful, or when you look at someone with a stereotype, call on your conscience, act like a human being, look and embrace humanity.
Thank you. A lot of it resonates, particularly obviously as a champion for women in the workforce and things, but everything you say about Black lives, the disparity between how we think, we came to this country as immigrants, but it's not everything is equal across the board. I don't know if Bob and Niraj, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. Maybe I'll go first. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be a part of the panel. Sanjeev, MR, and Raj, it's really an honor to be a part of such a distinguished group. When I first learned about what had happened with George Floyd, I have to say my emotion was outrage. I was really surprised and outraged that something like this could happen in America. But it opened my eyes to the fact that this is real. And this issue of racism is real. And in the corporate world, what I've thought about for our company is how do we weave diversity into the fabric of the company? So in everything we do, talent management, performance management, how we celebrate holidays around the world, our company, we have about 20,000 employees, and more than half of them work outside the US. So it's really, to me, about, on one hand, as corporate leaders, we want to do something now. And what I've said to my team is I want to fundamentally tie diversity and talent management together. So we have diversity from the beginning of the talent funnel all the way through to senior management. And that's going to require tailored development programs. It's going to require mentorship. And we're going to have to be very thoughtful and purposeful about how we have diversity through the talent pool.
Completely agree. So why don't I'll phrase the next question to Niraj. COVID-19 has changed the business environment, and I know that's true for us in healthcare, and transactions are favoring online, converting more to online, like telehealth saw a huge uptick, and I'm sure in your verticals you're seeing the same. And it appears that Wayfair in particular is well positioned to capitalize on this paradigm shift of brick and mortar to online. But Wayfair is obviously not immune to the challenges that the pandemic has brought. So how are you leading to help your employees, customers, suppliers mitigate this impact and then, thrive post-COVID and post-pandemic?
Yeah. Well, first, let me just say thank you for having me, and I'm very proud to be part of this panel. As you said, e-commerce has certainly been a beneficiary of the COVID crisis as everyone is at home. A lot of folks have been purchasing various goods online, but needless to say, that's exploded. We've seen our sales up through mid-June. We're up 90% year over year. And so while we've grown at a fast rate, 90 is a significant rate, in excess. The things we immediately focused on was, how do we prioritize the safety of our employees and our customers? And that was something that we reacted to very quickly. And we were able to, on the corporate staff, just having folks work from home was relatively easy. But in our supply chain operations, we have 18 million square feet of, across 65 buildings of transportation, logistics type operations. There, we made significant changes. We moved to 4 shifts that had separation, so there was no overlap. We moved to significantly enhanced cleaning protocols. We put in place things like temperature checks and everyone wearing masks. We were able to do those things very quickly. And so that's allowed us to not have any spread of COVID coming out of any of our buildings. And we've been just very happy with how our team just rallied and did all this very, very quickly. I think one of the things we've really focused on through this period is how can we help our employees and how can we help the communities that we're part of. And so, we've been able to donate millions of dollars to COVID-related charities and Feeding America. We've helped set up some of the makeshift hospitals in multiple locations as they were kind of in a very emergency basis getting set up at the very beginning of the crisis. We set up a meals program, so to help our associates who are working in all our supply chain buildings, we basically arranged for them to be able to take home a meal for their whole family twice a week. And we did that through partnering with local restaurants that were independently owned and enabling them to have business so that they could retain their employees. And so this type of approach we found has worked really well in terms of, we've always had an amazing team that we have over 16,000 people. But just always worrying about taking care of each other. And we then extend that view to our suppliers as well. And so one of the things we found is communicating more than ever was really helpful. And frankly, on the racial justice point as well, that's a kind of a key topic and very near and dear. And it's the same thing, just having internal conversations and streaming them to the whole company and bringing everyone into the conversation, while also coupling it with goals that are very actionable, I think is how you can make a change.
And also being very candid about that it exists. I think acknowledging and understanding and learning. So I don't know, Bob, Ravi, do you want to add anything to it?
I think it's an interesting thing for us we sort of defined the same as Niraj's 3 priorities. Number 1 was people first and safety. The second was, for us, we have a lot of factories and distribution centers, keeping them running while being mindful of the safety of our employees. And third was making sure that we had strong liquidity and the financial viability of the firm. The second one I want to dwell on for a second, because it was easier with people based in offices, right? You can have them work from home and use technology, etc. But it's really our factory employees and our DCs where we didn't want them to feel that, hey, they were making sacrifices. So we've gone out of our way to dramatically improve the conditions there in terms of even within factories. And I've gone and toured them. And then in terms of really helping educate on the use of masks, we ordered masks before it had become sort of prevalent, and so we pushed that. So a lot of this has to do with, and we really think of our factory workers and employees as our frontline heroes, and celebrating them and making sure the rest of the company is cheering their work. And I think that is so important because without what they're doing, we don't exist. So I think that's been very, very critical. And it's an interesting, from a business perspective, half of our businesses are just like doing extremely well because of consumer trends as they stay at home, whether they use a Rubbermaid container or Food Saver. But some of our writing business with Sharpie pens, etc., soft because of people staying at home. Yeah. So it's sort of an interesting balance. And how do you then adjust to all of this and It has implications on your performance incentives because you don't want to have haves and have-nots. So we're looking at incentives, which is one for all for one, etc.
That's great. That's good advice. So Bob, as you know, the existential challenge of ensuring environmental sustainability will not disappear unless we act on it. And I know, the planet is healing in these last 4 months, but we don't know what's at the other end. You are leading an alliance of companies in the plastics industry to respond to the threat of environmental degradation. Can you tell us how the spread of COVID-19 has impacted your sustainability initiatives?
Yes, indeed. So as you rightly say, sustainability is going to be very important and strategic to many of our companies, whether it's during this kind of pandemic or thereafter. You think about plastics and you think about your everyday life, especially today with the importance, even more importance on hygiene. Without plastics, we couldn't undertake everyday life. Whether it's the food packaging that we enjoy when we buy things at the grocery store, the single-use bags that have now come back because reusable bags are seen as being perhaps not as hygienic. So we can, and then healthcare workers, the masks that they wear, those come from products that we produce at our company, the raw materials that we produce. So the value of plastics, I think, is there. The issue is plastic waste. And how do we prevent waste from getting into the environment, getting into the waterways, into the sewers, and eventually into the ocean? And so what we did as an industry, and myself and a couple of other CEOs kind of led this initiative to form the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And if you have interest, you can go to the website. It's called endplasticwaste.org. And what we thought as a chemical industry is that this challenge is far greater than our industry, but perhaps we need to be the catalyst for bringing the entire value chain together. So what we set about to do was to set up this Alliance to End Plastic Waste, where we engaged converters, brand owners, retailers, waste handlers. So if you think about kind of the life cycle use of plastics, we launched the Alliance to End Plastic Waste about 1.5 years ago. We have 50 member companies. I'm one of the officers of the Alliance. David Taylor, the CEO of Procter & Gamble, he's the chairman. I was the original chairman while we were still trying to stand it up. And then as we launched, we thought that having a brand leading the way in terms of chairmanship would be important. And so the idea is essentially that the value chain comes together to design more sustainable packaging. We work with the waste handlers like Suez and Veolia and others to help us understand how can we collect the waste efficiently. And then it's really all about recover, recycle, and reuse so that we create circularity. Because I think a life without plastics is not possible, but I think we can have a life and we can have a world without plastic waste.
Be responsible about it. Agree. That's great.
Exactly.
I'm going to go check out the website, and I'm sure we can make sure it's accessible to everyone. So I'll wrap with one question to each of you. How has your Indian heritage influenced your corporate career and success, just in general leadership roles? Open it up to the panel.
I'll go first. So I immigrated to America when I was 10. My name is Bhavish, but at a very young age, I moved to a small town in Ohio, and I remember nobody could pronounce it. I always knew when the teacher got to my name during roll call, it was my name, because he or she would stop and try to figure out how to say the name. So Bhavish turned into Bhav, turned into Bob. But what I remember about that time was that my uncle sponsored us to come to America. My mother had very little money, single mom. And how I think sort of this immigration has formed my leadership style is sort of, I learned from my mom and my uncle great values, hard work, thinking of others before we think of ourselves. I think in our culture, we're taught that. In our religion, we're taught that. the importance of family. And I literally talk in our company with our employees about family and having a sense of ownership, taking care of one another. And that ties to the diversity topic early on, is that we really are family and we're somehow connected in the company. And so I think these values of hard work, having a sense of ownership, thinking of others before you think of yourself, really living those. We all talk about those, but can we live that every day? And does it inspire employees in the company? So I think, that's sort of what I've brought, and humility as well. And I learned that from my early days and from my mom and from my uncle.
That's great. Great to hear. And I know Ravi shared earlier as well. So we're at time, I believe. So that's a wrap for folks. And great nuggets of advice, not just on how, social justice and how do you champion for that, sustainability. We've covered a vast variety of topics and how things are transitioning online and how you can benefit from that. And I think it's also about leading and driving change to a more diverse, equitable society. So I want to thank Bob, Ravi, and Niraj, and over to you, Nandini.
Great. We'll take some questions now from the audience. Again, there's a Q&A box, and you can ask your questions there. The first one was, how did we choose this list? How did we define the context? Sorry for not mentioning that earlier. This was not done by a jury. Basically, we worked with the Fortune 500 list, the Forbes 2000 list, and the Forbes private company list, and found all executives, CEOs, chairpersons, and presidents of Indian origin. So this was really dictated to us by existing lists that we got this information from. The next question was for Raj. How do we tie this into the BLM movement, since African Americans have largely been left out of leadership roles? How does the Indian or Indiaspora community work with the BLM movement? Raj, this question is for you.
Great question. Actually, most of you know that our younger daughter, who's from birth a civil rights lawyer forever, and was head of the Justice Department Civil Rights Division. And obviously, she made me aware of a lot of things, starting with her first case more than 20 years ago. But frankly, this recent experience has taught me something else. But like most of us, we have dealt with or known hundreds of African-American executives around the world, including in our own organization. My own personal assistant for 15 years was an African-American woman. But I have never, ever had a conversation with any one of them to ask, what does it feel like to be a Black person in America? And I have started that conversation. As much as I have never viewed anybody with a lens of a bias, but clearly there must have been something unconscious. Because, we have never socialized with African-American population, but professionally, yes. Personally, maybe on one hand, 5 fingers of my hand, I can count African-American friends who visited us, or we call them real friends. I think this particular moment has given me an opportunity to self-reflect on that and say, what can I do with the organization that I'm involved in, and personally, activities and organizations that are really motivated to support this movement. How, if I can do things directly myself, but equally important, support the organizations that are taking the lead on this, and impact where I can the organizations I'm working with on the board level. That's kind of been my take, is to personalize this, as well as professionally make an impact, as well as financially contribute to the organizations.
Great. Thanks, Raj. A question now for Niraj and Ravi. How were you influenced by your Indian roots? Niraj?
Yeah, so my So I was born in the U.S. My parents were both immigrants to the U.S. And I would say one of the things that I really got from them was sort of they were always very supportive and encouraging of me to try anything I wanted to do. And so my grandfather in India was an entrepreneur. My parents, if you think about the immigrant's journey, an immigrant is basically an entrepreneur. And so I think that gave me a lot of kind of courage early on, if you will, to sort of just pursue things that were of interest. And so between the focus on really the importance of an education and then sort of the sort of openness to try anything I wanted, I think that effectively defined how I got into my career. I ended up starting my first company right out of college, out of Cornell in 1995. And Wayfair is the third company I started. I was 7 years out of college at that point, all three with the same co-founder, and just sort of one thing led to the next. And I think that, really came from my parents, that sort of, encouragement, because I think when you're young, you really could get steered into, this path or that path, and sort of the openness of the sort of kind of just, work hard at whatever you want to do and you can achieve it. And I very much think that came from my Indian roots.
Ravi?
So MR, for me, my father was a brigadier in the Indian Army, and a prestigious job, but he didn't make a lot of money, and he was completely incorruptible and taught me the value of honesty and integrity. But he died at a very young age, at 52. And then my mother, I was quite young, and my mother was in her 40s, and my dad had left us penniless, and my mother didn't even know how to write a check. Enterprising woman, and different age, might have been lived life differently, but in India, that was tough. And that's what created for me this whole importance, and having grown up with aunts, this importance of women should not have an economic dependence on men. And that it's so important that, and I have two daughters, and that they can be anything they want to be. And that's sort of been a burning passion. And in terms of India, for me, tolerance has been, and family values have been so important, which has extended, I think, as Bob was saying, of how I run companies. Because I look at all my employees as part of an extended family. And so then you lead as much from your heart as you do from your head. And it also teaches you, we all came from humble beginnings. I suspect most of the people on this list. So you know what it is like, and it's easier to identify with the person at the lowest end of the totem pole, and then realize that your job as CEO is not about yourself, that you exist for your employees, the true essence of servant leadership. So for me, India has sort of helped me with my heart. I love America. It's great to see, when you're blessed with having two countries that you can owe your allegiance to. But I think we all as CEOs, Martin Luther King created this for all of us that we are here today. It's time to give back. And we should not assume just because in India we had political freedom and we didn't even think we were brown. When you come here, and for Black people, you really understand that there are systemic issues and systemic barriers that you really need to remove and help remove.
Great. Thanks, Ravi. I want to take a moment to recognize two of our board members of Indiaspora from India who joined us. Rajan Navani, who is the CEO of Jetline Group and Jet Synthesis, and also Arun Kumar, who is the CEO of KPMG India. So in case the media has any requests for them, they're available later on tonight in India time to also answer questions, but just wanted to recognize them. Also, Ravi, you made a question for you. You made an interesting point about from groups being minorities, the lives of Indian Americans are different, quite different than African Americans. So what was the light bulb moment for everyone else where you realized we are brown people, but privileged brown people with a different lifestyle and a heritage than Blacks? Niraj or Bob, when was that light bulb moment for you?
Sure. What I would say, to be honest, and I would love for the answer to be different, but to be honest, the moment was just not too long ago. It was actually during this period of time when what happened was, it was not just noticing what the awful events of what's happened out there, but it was also a number of African-American folks I know who shared stories of what had happened to them. And these are folks who've been very successful, business career-wise, financially, and just to hear the stories and realize that effectively this is a pervasive problem, and it has, structural problems that are the roots of it, and that it was perhaps something I should have known a long time ago. But to be honest, I would say the realization fully hit me recently.
Great. Thank you. Bob, any comments on that?
Sure. I mean, I agree with Niraj that it really raised my awareness. And I think I've always thought about diversity as being respectful of one another, respecting differences. But I guess the way I think about it today is, how do we enable diversity? How do we welcome it? How do we celebrate it? We have to do more than just recognize it. And it's not that we can walk in shoes. I don't think an African-American person could walk in my shoes, nor could I walk in theirs. But I think it's important to understand that this exists. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to continue to exist. So the letter that I wrote to my employees was about change starts with each one of us. Don't wait for somebody else to start the change. I think we all have to start the process of change. And that's really what's come to light to me.
Thank you. A question for the two women on the panels. Yamini, if you could get your video back on, and Nandini, you're there. So the question is, how do women break through the old boys network to have conversations which lead to leadership roles? Because right now there's this whole network of in offices and everywhere, the guys go out and the women don't go out, and all this stuff. How do you break through all that stuff?
I'm happy to take this. I can start. It's a challenging question, right? I heard earlier Ravi was saying how he is very focused on gender diversity. And I found, one is, I think women need to help each other. As Albright said, I'm a big fan. There's a special place in hell for women who don't help each other. But it's not enough to just have women, because there's not enough of us. And so I would say having male allies, having folks who understand what it is, just like you don't understand what it is to walk in a Black person's shoes. The same is true for men who are in most senior roles. And I can tell you, as somebody who's, interviewed for several board roles, and I make it all the way up, and it usually goes to a white male, cisgendered white male, if you will. And so I think awareness is important. Having mentors, I heard someone else say this, mentors, sponsors, and advisors, and knowing what each of them bring to enable you and empower you is important. And most of all, we all have to give back, I think, for those of us who are in leadership roles, women in particular, because it's not that there's only 9 seats at the table, as Ginsburg said, right? You should assume there's more seats and take as many as you can get, and not vie against each other and compete against each other. So that's one way of looking at it. Yamini, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, Nandini, I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying, which is, having a group of mentors, advisors, not just the ones that look like you or think like you, but very, very diverse mentors. I will say that most of my career, I've had, men as mentors, and they've done such an amazing job of encouraging me and really helping me think about my career options. And so I think that is certainly one. I'd also say self-advocacy, to the point that Raj made way earlier. A lot of my early experiences was really, demons that I had for myself. I don't think I can be this type of a leader. I don't think I can actually put myself up for a senior role. And so, not saying all of it is that, but I'm saying there is some of it. So you do need to look at your own biases and have a viewpoint in terms of where you can actually be. So a combination of, what I really like seeing in the industry right now is there is significant awareness, and there are organizations like Allraise that actually have a viewpoint of how many women should be in boards and how many women should be as CEOs, and kind of being associated with those, all of that. And then this commitment that, for every step we take, we need to bring, 10 people over. So, if you get to like a VP level, bring 10 people over to that. If you get to the C-suite, get 10 people more to that. And having that commitment and having just this need to inspire others and help others get there is also equally important. And it's a long journey. I don't think that we've cracked the code to crack the ceiling, but we're making steps.
Great. Thank you so much, Yamini. And I think that concludes our press conference. I want to thank everyone